Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. This video is actually going to be a little bit interesting because I'm not actually going to write any code. I'm going to show code that's already been written, but I'm not going to write any new code. And the reasons for that will become clear in just a little bit. So this video is specifically about how to handle database migrations as part of your continuous deployment pipeline. It's not really continuous integration. It's specifically the continuous deployment piece. And there are a couple, before we get into the code, there are a couple things that are worth keeping in mind. So if you're interested in keeping your application running the entire time while you're doing these database migrations, there's a little bit of extra thought that has to go into place before you can, you can't just do any database migration and expect to have it work. So obviously the simple way around that is you can separate your continuous deployment pipeline into multiple steps. And the first of those steps being just take your application offline. Just have downtime, have a maintenance window. And basically what you do is you take the app offline, you'd migrate the database, you'd migrate the code, you'd bring the app back online. That's a perfectly valid way to do it, but it does mean that you have downtime. I am not a huge fan of downtime. I really strive to have as much uptime as possible, and both because there's the technical challenge and because the world is 24/7. I don't really want to be, or at least I don't want to resign myself to the idea of having to have a maintenance window with the applications that I use, or the applications that I create and publish. So how do you try as hard as possible to have a zero downtime migration? One option could be that you never have any database migrations. That's unrealistic. Option number two is that you do database migrations kind of on the fly as needed. So kind of this is like the copy on write sort of model, right? So as if a user requests a resource that needs to be upgraded, then you upgrade the resource and then return it to them. That's problematic, especially when you're dealing with a relational database, because your relational databases have specific structures. So the strategy that I recommend is make your database migrations idempotent. It's a big word that just means you can run them as many times as you want, and you always get the same result. So things like table creation only happens if the table doesn't exist. Table alterations only happen if the column you're adding doesn't exist, something along those lines. If you're adding records as part of a migration, you check to make sure that the record doesn't exist first and then create it. Or do an upsert sort of thing, which theoretically it should be an update to the exact same state, but yeah. So there are those options. Or I suppose you could do an upsert with if the thing already exists, you just don't change it. That's a valid approach as well. And the second piece is only do database updates that won't break previous versions of the code. So things like column adds, totally fine, because the old code just it doesn't, that column didn't exist when the old code was created, so obviously it's not going to go looking for it. Table or column deletions, bad news. Don't do that. Old code will break if it goes looking for that column. Same thing with tables. Table creation, totally fine. Table deletion, not so fine. If you do have to change a column, the best way to do that is to either change it in a way that old data is still valid. So like making it wider, totally fine. Making it narrower, not fine. In order to do that, you would introduce a new column and then gradually phase out the old column. That approach would be totally fine. And I could come up with many more examples, but the basic premise is that make it so that the new version of your database will still work with the old version of your code. The old version of code won't use the new stuff, but it won't break the old code for the, hopefully less than 10 or 15 minutes that this whole publish process is occurring. So then your continuous deployment pipeline would have two stages. It would deploy the database, and then it would deploy the code. And that dependency would have to be there. You couldn't upgrade the code until the database was upgraded, because you don't want let's say the database upgrade takes longer than the code upgrade. Now you have new code looking at old database. Bad things are going to happen, right? So 2 steps: upgrade database, upgrade code. Now let's look at some actual code. So here's Visual Studio Code. Let's actually look at Glassminnow. You can see I'm still set up from the previous video. But in Glassminnow, we have this DB folder and a bunch of migrations. And the way that I've been creating the database in development is actually see if I can find it. Here we go. So basically what I do is let me zoom in even further on this, because this is kind of the crucial part of this this exercise. So I list the SQL files in db/migrations/star.sql. I sort them because they all have date stamps on them. Basically, I want the ones that were created first to be executed first, because there are dependencies there. Obviously, makes sense. And then I cat them in order. I use xargs just to put it all into a single command and cat everything at once. And then I log it. I pipe it into MySQL, and I specify a host. I'm running this from within Windows Subsystem for Linux, so I do want it, and my MySQL server is running on my Windows host, so I need to specify a host name, and then I specify a user, and then the database that I'm going to be using, and obviously there's a password, so -p. So that's basically it, and that is the command that I will use for the continuous deployment stage. It's basically that exact command. I'll list out all of these SQL files, and then have cat all of them to. The only things that I'll change are the host name and the authentication information. That'll probably actually be an SSH pipe or an SSH tunneled MySQL connection. I'll figure that out on the off camera. But yeah, that's basically how everything works. Now, the reason I can't do this right now is because most of these are not idempotent. So here, this is create table if not exist. That's good. Insert into groups, not idempotent. What I need to do is augment this so that it's on on failure, on key failure, I think group ID is the primary key. Yeah, well, it's not listed as a primary key, but it is the primary key. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it is listed as the primary key. So I need to make that statement idempotent. There are many others here. Here's a table. No. Well, here's a migration. Insert into line items. Select something from events. Most of these, for a new installation, this shouldn't matter. But for an old installation, probably need to do something a little bit different here. This one might be okay because there are no existing installations, so I don't really have to worry about this. But let's see, add table, create table. I'll need to add if not exists. There we go. Now that's idempotent. So I'll need to go through and do that for all of these. And probably what I'll do is I'll actually just create the job. So deploy prod, deploy staging. We'll need to add like deploy DB. Stage is going to be deploy DB, which I actually have to create. So I lied. I am writing some code here. That's configuration, but it's still essentially code. And then for script, it will be basically this. And then only on master, and I'll probably actually convert this to rules so that I can run it manually on this branch, and then it'll always run on master. And obviously I'll need to update this, and that'll probably come from environment variables. So things like it looks like this is wrapped up in deploy.sh. So I'll have to pull out some environment variables to specify what host I'm gonna send this off to, and that sort of thing. But basically, all that to say, sorry, what was I saying? This will need to happen first. This will be the command that runs. Oh yeah, I'll probably just run this, see what breaks, see what complains, because I will be deploying this to a machine that already has Glassminnow installed. I'll see what breaks, see what complains, fix that, make that idempotent, run it again, and when it is all green, then I know it's good. And from that point on, I make all additional migrations, which are just SQL scripts, again with the date stamp at the beginning. Make all new migrations idempotent. So hopefully that was a useful discussion on how to introduce your database migrations into a continuous deployment pipeline. This is something that I've been thinking about, pondering for several years. Never really liked any of the approaches that I had before, but I did find actually with .NET Core, at least with Entity Framework. I think this is with older versions of Entity Framework, but definitely with Entity Framework Core, you can create a migration script and you can specify that it be idempotent. So it will take all of your Entity Framework migrations, and obviously Entity Framework has its own language for defining migrations, it will create an idempotent SQL script for you. Or if you just run the migrations through the tool directly, you can make it be idempotent as well, so that it will only change the database if there are changes that need to be applied to the database. So you can run that as many times as you want, and it won't break, it won't die, which is great. So this is the way to do it. It's basically, idempotency and very strategic database upgrades. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, click that thumbs up button, like the video. I definitely appreciate that. Please subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when new videos come out. And leave a comment or question below. If you've done this, if you have this as part of your continuous deployment pipeline and like what you're doing, if it's different from what I described here, leave a comment below and let me know what it is. I really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.